After 28 years of unanswered questions, a $500 drone would pierce the murky depths of Pine Bridge Lake in rural Georgia. What it found would finally bring closure to one of the state's most heartbreaking mysteries. The ghostly outline emerging from the green-brown water was unmistakable. A sedan, covered in decades of algae and rust, sat 47 feet below the surface where no one had thought to look. Inside that submerged tomb were the answers that two families had been desperate to find since May 1995. This is the story of Lily Hart and Marcus Grant, high school sweethearts who vanished after prom night, and the extraordinary discovery that would finally bring them home. Lily Marie Hart was everything you'd want in a daughter. Honor roll student, volunteer at the animal shelter, president of the Future Farmers of America Club. Her senior yearbook quote read, "Life is not measured by the number of breaths we take, but by the moments that take our breath away." She planned to study veterinary medicine at the University of Georgia in the fall. Marcus Anthony Grant was the golden boy of Riverton High, star quarterback who led the Eagles to their first state championship in 15 years. Early admission to Georgia Tech on a partial football scholarship. His teammates called him Grant the Giant, even though he was only 6'2". What made him special wasn't his size, it was his heart. They'd been dating since sophomore year, that sweet kind of first love that makes adults nostalgic and teenagers believe in forever. In Riverton, Georgia, population 8,400, Lily and Marcus were royalty. Homecoming king and queen, prom court, the couple everyone expected to get married right after college and settle down in the house with the white picket fence. Riverton was the kind of small southern town where Friday night football games shut down Main Street and church potlucks were front-page news in the weekly paper. Everyone knew everyone, and most folks had lived there their whole lives. It was safe. It was predictable. It was the last place anyone expected two teenagers to simply vanish without a trace. The Hart family had run the local hardware store for 3 generations. Lily's father, William, was known for giving free advice along with every purchase and extending credit to families going through hard times. Her mother, Patricia, taught 3rd grade at Riverton Elementary and directed the children's choir at First Baptist Church. The Grants owned the largest farm in the county, growing cotton and soybeans across 500 acres. Marcus's father, James, served on the school board and city council. His mother, Dorothy, was president of the Garden Club and organized the annual Peach Festival that brought visitors from 3 counties over. These were solid, respected families, the kind of people who paid their taxes, helped their neighbors, and raised their children to do the same. When their kids went missing, it shook the entire community to its core. Friday, May 19, 1995, started like any other spring day in Riverton. The dogwood trees were in full bloom, and the air carried the sweet scent of honeysuckle. For 18-year-olds across town, it was the day they'd been anticipating for months, prom night. Sarah Jenkins had been Lily's best friend since kindergarten. They'd planned every detail of prom together, from their coordinating dresses to their after-party plans. Lily was so excited she could barely eat breakfast, Sarah remembers. She'd been planning this night since we were freshmen. The lavender dress, the matching shoes, even the way she wanted to wear her hair. She practiced dancing in her bedroom mirror for weeks. At 5 o'clock, the pre-prom photo session began at the Hart residence. Both families gathered in the backyard under the old oak tree, where Lily used to have her tea parties as a little girl. Patricia Hart had decorated the area with white ribbons and fresh flowers from her garden. They looked like something out of a fairy tale, Patricia recalls, her voice still thick with emotion after all these years. Lily in that beautiful lavender dress and Marcus so handsome in his black tuxedo. He kept fumbling with his bow tie because he was nervous, and Lily would reach up and fix it for him. They were so in love. The photographs from that afternoon show 2 teenagers on the cusp of adulthood, their whole lives ahead of them. Lily's dress was a flowing lavender gown with delicate beadwork that caught the light. Marcus wore a classic black tuxedo with a lavender bow tie and cummerbund to match his date. In every photo, they're touching his hand on her waist, her fingers intertwined with his, their heads leaning together as they smile at the camera. Robert Morrison had been driving limousines in the area for over 20 years. He'd seen hundreds of prom couples, but Lily and Marcus stood out. Most kids that age, they're trying to act all grown up and sophisticated, Morrison remembers. But those two were just genuinely happy. Marcus kept opening doors for Lily, making sure her dress didn't get caught. And she'd just light up every time he looked at her. In 30 years of driving, I never saw 2 kids more in love. The limousine arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. Morrison helped Lily with her dress as she climbed into the back of the white stretch Lincoln. Marcus followed, carrying her small beaded purse and a corsage box he'd forgotten to give her during photos. The drive to the high school was filled with laughter and nervous chatter. Morrison could hear them in the back, Marcus practicing his speech for Prom King nominations and Lily reassuring him that he'd do fine. They made 2 stops along the way to pick up their friends, Sarah and her date, Tommy Walsh, and Marcus's best friend, David Cooper, with his girlfriend, Jennifer Mills. The 6 teenagers arrived at Riverton High School at 7:30, joining the stream of formally dressed couples, making their way into the decorated gymnasium. The prom committee had transformed the space into an underwater paradise, complete with blue and green streamers, cardboard coral reefs, and a disco ball that cast dancing lights across the walls like sunlight filtering through water. The theme was Under the Sea, chosen by popular vote 3 months earlier. Lily had been on the decorating committee and spent countless hours after school helping to create the magical underwater world. She and Marcus entered to a round of applause from their classmates. Everyone expected them to be crowned prom king and queen. And they were. At 9:15, Principal Johnson announced the royal court. Marcus Grant and Lily Hart were called to the center of the dance floor, where plastic crowns were placed on their heads, and they shared their first dance as prom royalty. The song was Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers, a classic that had been Lily's choice. They looked so happy up there, remembers Jennifer Mills, now Jennifer Hartwell, a mother of 3 living in Atlanta. Like they were in their own little world. Marcus was whispering something in Lily's ear during the slow dance, and she just threw her head back and laughed. It was pure joy. The dance continued until 11:30. Most couples had plans for after-parties, but Lily and Marcus had decided to spend some quiet time together before joining their friends. They said goodbye to their group around 11:45, promising to meet everyone at the traditional post-prom breakfast at Denny's in nearby Macon. Robert Morrison was waiting in the parking lot to drive them wherever they wanted to go. The plan was to take them to Lookout Point, a scenic overlook about 15 minutes outside town, where couples often went to watch the sunrise after prom. It was innocent enough a chance to talk and enjoy the night air before the celebrating continued. But Lily and Marcus never made it to the limousine. The last confirmed sighting of the couple was captured on a grainy security camera at Murphy's gas station on Highway 41, just outside Riverton's city limits. The timestamp shows 12:17 a.m. on May 20, 1995. Marcus is pumping gas into his red 1988 Honda Civic while Lily sits in the passenger seat, still wearing her prom dress. She appears to be fixing her hair in the side mirror. The gas station attendant, Bobby Fletcher, remembered them because it was unusual to see such a dressed-up couple at that hour. The boy came in to pay, real polite-like, Fletcher recalled in a 1995 police interview. Said they were heading home from prom. The girl waved at me through the window. Pretty little thing in a fancy purple dress. I remember thinking they made a nice couple. That security camera footage, despite its poor quality, would become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the case. Marcus appears calm and unhurried as he replaces the gas cap and returns to the driver's seat. Lily can be seen talking to him as they pull away from the pump, heading north on Highway 41. It was the last time anyone would see them alive. By 9 o'clock Saturday morning, Patricia Hart was worried. Lily had promised to be home by 2 a.m., and she'd never broken a curfew in her life. When she didn't answer her pager, Patricia called the Grant house. Dorothy Grant was equally concerned. Marcus had been given permission to stay out until 3, but he always called if he was going to be late. His truck was still parked in the driveway, which meant he was driving his Honda Civic, the car he'd saved for 2 years working at the feed store to buy. The parents called all of their children's friends, hoping to find them asleep on someone's couch after a long night of celebrating. But Sarah Jenkins hadn't seen them since they left the school. David Cooper assumed they'd gone straight home. Even Robert Morrison, the limousine driver, had no idea where they'd gone after leaving the parking lot. By 11 a.m., both sets of parents were at the Riverton Police Department filing missing persons reports. Chief of Police Harold Brennan, a 20-year veteran who'd known both families for years, took the reports personally. In a town like Riverton, kids don't just disappear, Chief Brennan said in a 1995 interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. These were good kids from good families. Something had to be wrong. The first 48 hours of a missing persons case are critical. Law enforcement knows that if someone isn't found within that window, the chances of a positive outcome drop dramatically. Chief Brennan mobilized every resource at his disposal, calling in favors from neighboring departments and even requesting assistance from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Search teams combed every back road in a 50-mile radius. Volunteers from across the county joined the effort, walking through dense pine forests and checking abandoned buildings. The Georgia State Patrol provided helicopter support, flying grid patterns over the rural landscape surrounding Riverton. The local media picked up the story immediately. By Sunday evening, Lily and Marcus's prom photos were on the front page of newspapers from Atlanta to Savannah. The images of the beautiful young couple in their formal wear struck a chord with parents across the state. "It could have been anyone's children," said Mary Beth Sullivan, who drove down from Augusta to join the search. "Looking at those pictures, they reminded me of my own daughter and her boyfriend. I couldn't just sit at home knowing they were out there somewhere." The search focused initially on the route between Riverton and Lookout Point, the scenic overlook where the couple had planned to go. Search and rescue teams walked the roadways, looking for any sign that Marcus might have lost control of his Honda Civic on the winding mountain road. Divers were brought in to search the small ponds and creeks in the area. The Chattahoochee River, which runs about 30 miles east of Riverton, was also searched, though it seemed unlikely the couple would have driven that far out of their way. 3 days into the search, a breakthrough seemed to come when a hunter reported seeing a red car pulled off a logging road about 20 miles north of town. The entire search effort pivoted to that area, with dozens of volunteers and law enforcement officers combing through dense forest. But it was a false lead. The car belonged to another teenager who'd taken his girlfriend there for privacy and was too embarrassed to come forward initially. When he finally contacted police, another promising lead evaporated. By the end of the first week, the official search was scaled back. The FBI had been consulted, but determined there was no evidence of kidnapping or foul play that would warrant federal involvement. The case remained with local and state authorities, but the intensive grid searches were suspended. The families refused to give up. William Hart closed his hardware store and spent every daylight hour driving back roads, checking every abandoned barn and hunting cabin he could find. James Grant organized volunteers to continue searching areas that hadn't been thoroughly covered by the official teams. The vigils began on the 10th day. First Baptist Church, where both families attended, held the first prayer service for Lily and Marcus. Over 300 people packed the sanctuary, with many more standing outside. Pastor Reynolds led prayers for the safe return of the teenagers and for strength for their families. The whole community was hurting, remembers longtime Riverton resident Helen McCarthy. "These weren't just two missing kids, they were our kids. Everyone felt like they'd lost family members. You couldn't go anywhere in town without seeing their pictures taped to store windows or telephone poles." The Georgia Bureau of Investigation assigned Detective Ray Carlson to lead the case. A 15-year veteran with experience in missing persons investigations, Carlson approached the disappearance methodically, re-interviewing everyone who'd had contact with the couple on prom night. "The timeline was clear up until they left the gas station," Detective Carlson explains. "After that, it was like they just vanished. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no trace of the vehicle. In my experience, that usually means one of two things. Either they left voluntarily or something happened very quickly that prevented them from calling for help. In any missing persons case, investigators must consider all possibilities, even the uncomfortable ones." Detective Carlson began building a list of people who might have had reason to harm Lily and Marcus, though both teenagers seemed to have no enemies. The first person questioned was Derek Mathis, Lily's ex-boyfriend from her junior year. They'd dated for about 6 months before Lily broke up with him to focus on her relationship with Marcus. Some classmates reported that Derek had been bitter about the breakup, occasionally making snide comments about the couple. Derek was working the night shift at a textile factory in nearby Griffin on May 19th, with dozens of witnesses and a time clock to verify his alibi. He also voluntarily took a polygraph test, which he passed. Detective Carlson quickly eliminated him as a suspect. "Derek was hurt, sure, but he wasn't violent," says former classmate Michelle Torres. "He was actually dating someone else by prom time. I think the police had to check him out, but none of us really thought he was involved." The second theory that gained traction was more disturbing. Several people reported seeing a hitchhiker on Highway 41 in the days before prom, described as a scruffy man in his 30s, carrying a military-style backpack. Some speculated that Lily and Marcus might have stopped to help this stranger and become victims of foul play. Despite extensive efforts to identify this mysterious hitchhiker, including composite sketches distributed across 3 states, no one matching the description was ever found. The theory remained popular among local residents, but never yielded any concrete leads. "There were a lot of rumors flying around," remembers Sarah Jenkins. "People were scared, so they were looking for someone to blame." But Lily and Marcus weren't the type to pick up hitchhikers. They were both too cautious for that. The most painful theory for the families was also the most likely from a statistical standpoint: that the teenagers had run away together. Detective Carlson had to explore this possibility, despite the vehement protests from both sets of parents. "Lily would never have put us through this," Patricia Hart insisted during a tearful interview with local television station WMAZ. "She knew how much we loved her. She was planning to start college in 3 months. She had her whole life mapped out." The evidence against the runaway theory was substantial. Neither teenager had withdrawn money from their bank accounts. Their belongings, including items they would have taken if planning to leave, remained in their bedrooms untouched. Lily's acceptance letter to the University of Georgia was still pinned to her bulletin board, and Marcus had been excited about starting football practice at Georgia Tech in August. Perhaps most convincingly, both teenagers had summer jobs lined up. Lily was supposed to start working at the local veterinary clinic the Monday after prom, something she'd been looking forward to for months. Marcus had a job at his uncle's construction company, saving money for college expenses. These kids were planners, Detective Carlson noted in his case files. They had goals, ambitions, family support. Nothing in their background suggested they were unhappy enough to abandon their lives. As the investigation continued, another possibility emerged that was even more troubling than foul play: that Marcus and Lily had been involved in an accident that hadn't been discovered yet. The rural areas around Riverton were full of abandoned quarries, deep ravines, and isolated stretches of road where a car could go off the pavement and remain hidden for years. This theory led to expanded search efforts, including the use of cadaver dogs and specialized equipment to probe areas that were difficult to access on foot. Every quarry within 100 miles was searched. Divers checked larger bodies of water, including several man-made lakes created by damming local streams. But the searchers found nothing. No trace of the red Honda Civic, no evidence that the couple had met with an accident. The case began to take on an almost supernatural quality in the minds of local residents. How could 2 people and a car simply vanish without leaving any trace? Detective Carlson's case file grew thicker by the week. Tips poured in from across the southeast as the story gained regional attention. Psychics offered their services. Amateur detectives proposed elaborate theories involving everything from human trafficking to alien abduction. Every lead was investigated, no matter how far-fetched. A reported sighting in Florida led to a 3-day search of Jacksonville. A woman in Tennessee claimed to have seen the couple at a truck stop, leading to another dead end. Each false hope was devastating for the families. "We chased every possibility," Detective Carlson recalls. "No matter how unlikely it seemed, we couldn't afford to overlook anything. But after 6 months, I had to face the reality that we might never know what happened to those kids." By the end of 1995, the active investigation into Lily and Marcus's disappearance had been suspended. Detective Carlson kept the case file on his desk and continued following up on tips as they came in, but the trail had gone completely cold. The impact on Riverton was profound and lasting. The annual prom was cancelled for the next 2 years, deemed too painful a reminder of what the community had lost. When it was finally reinstated in 1998, it was moved to a different venue and given a completely different format. "It was like a shadow fell over the whole town," remembers former Mayor Robert Collins. "People were afraid to let their kids drive at night. Parents who used to give their teenagers freedom became overprotective. The innocence was gone. The families struggled to find ways to cope with their loss. Without bodies to bury or definitive answers about what had happened, the grieving process was complicated by uncertainty. Hope and despair alternated in cycles that left everyone emotionally exhausted. Patricia Hart threw herself into volunteer work, helping other families of missing persons navigate the confusing maze of law enforcement and media attention. She became an advocate for improved communication between police departments and better coordination of search efforts. William Hart had the opposite reaction, withdrawing from community activities and spending most of his time alone in his workshop behind the hardware store. Regular customers noted that he'd aged years in the months following Lily's disappearance. "He never got over it," says longtime friend Carl Watson. "Bill was never the same after Lily vanished. He'd sit in that workshop for hours, just staring at nothing. I think he blamed himself somehow, like he should have been able to protect her." The Grant family channeled their grief into action, establishing the Find Lily and Marcus Foundation in 1997. The non-profit organization provided resources for families of missing persons and funded search efforts for similar cases across Georgia. "We couldn't bring our son back," Dorothy Grant explains, "but maybe we could help other families find their children. It gave us a sense of purpose when everything else felt meaningless." The foundation raised money through bake sales, car washes, and an annual 5K run that drew participants from across the state. Over the years, they helped fund search efforts for dozens of missing persons cases and provided emotional support for families going through similar ordeals. Detective Carlson retired from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in 2010, but he never forgot the case that had haunted him for 15 years. He kept copies of all the files in his home office, occasionally reviewing them to see if he'd missed anything. It was the one that got away, Carlson admits. I investigated hundreds of cases over my career, but Lily and Marcus were different. Maybe because they were so young, or because they seemed to have such bright futures ahead of them, I always felt like I'd failed them somehow. The case was officially reclassified as a cold case in 1999, though it was never closed. New detectives would occasionally review the files, hoping fresh eyes might spot something their predecessors had missed. Advances in forensic technology led to periodic re-examination of evidence, but there was precious little physical evidence to work with. As the years passed, the story of the vanished prom couple became part of local folklore. New residents of Riverton would eventually hear the tale, usually told in hushed tones by long-time residents who remembered the search efforts and the heartbreak that followed. The case was featured in several true crime television programs over the years, bringing brief spurts of renewed attention and tips from viewers. But none of the leads panned out, and eventually, even the media attention faded. By 2020, 25 years after their disappearance, Lily Hart and Marcus Grant had become something like ghosts in Riverton. Their names were engraved on a memorial plaque in the town square alongside other residents who had died too young. Their high school class held memorial services at their 10- and 20-year reunions. But their families never stopped hoping for answers. The internet age brought new possibilities to cold cases across the country. Online communities of amateur investigators began collaborating on unsolved mysteries, sharing information and theories across vast networks of strangers united by curiosity and a desire for justice. Lily and Marcus's case found new life on platforms like Reddit and Facebook, where true crime enthusiasts dissected every aspect of their disappearance. New theories emerged, old evidence was re-examined, and the case gained a following among people who had never heard of Riverton, Georgia. One of the most active online investigators was Ethan Lowe, a civil engineer from Duluth, Georgia, who had become fascinated with the case after seeing it featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in 2018. Unlike many armchair detectives, Lowe brought technical expertise to his amateur investigations. I'd always been interested in missing persons cases, Lowe explains, but I had skills that might actually be useful. I knew about mapping software, geological surveys, and search techniques that weren't available back in 1995. Lowe began studying topographical maps of the area around Riverton, looking for locations that might have been missed in the original search. He was particularly interested in bodies of water, knowing that submerged vehicles were often not discovered for decades. The advent of affordable drone technology in the late 2010s opened up new possibilities for searching large areas quickly and efficiently. Lowe purchased his first drone in 2019 and began teaching himself to use it for search and rescue operations. Drones changed everything, Lowe says. You could cover areas in hours that would take ground teams days to search, and with the right equipment, you could see things underwater that divers might miss. Lowe wasn't the only person using new technology to investigate old cases. Across the country, hobbyist pilots were finding missing vehicles, often in bodies of water that had been searched years earlier with less sophisticated equipment. The success stories were remarkable. In 2019, a drone operator in Texas found a car that had been missing for 12 years, submerged in a ranch pond. The following year, another amateur investigator discovered 2 vehicles in a Florida lake, solving cases that had puzzled police for over a decade. These discoveries were possible because of advances in sonar technology, underwater cameras, and GPS mapping that allowed searchers to systematically cover areas that had been searched before, but not as thoroughly. Lowe began reaching out to families of missing persons cases across Georgia, offering his services free of charge. He had a particular interest in cases involving missing vehicles, knowing that cars often ended up in water during accidents. Water searches in the 1990s were limited by the technology available then, Lowe explains. Divers could only stay down for limited periods, and they had to rely on feel and limited visibility. Modern sonar can map entire lake beds in detail, showing every object on the bottom. In early 2023, Lowe contacted the Find Lily and Marcus Foundation, offering to conduct aerial and sonar searches of water bodies near Riverton that hadn't been thoroughly investigated with modern equipment. Dorothy Grant, now in her 70s but still active in the foundation, was skeptical but hopeful. Over the years, dozens of people had offered to help find her son, and most had been well-meaning but ineffective. We'd been disappointed so many times, Dorothy recalls, but Ethan was different. He had the equipment, the expertise, and the dedication. He wasn't looking for money or publicity, he just wanted to help. Lowe spent weeks studying the case files, mapping the locations that had been searched in 1995, and identifying areas where new technology might yield different results. He was particularly interested in Pinebridge Lake, a small body of water about 15 miles northeast of Riverton. Pinebridge Lake had been searched by divers in the original investigation, but only in the areas closest to the road, where a car was most likely to have entered the water. The lake was deeper and larger than it appeared from the surface, with several coves and inlets that would have been difficult to search thoroughly in 1995. The original search focused on the obvious entry points, Lowe notes, but if a car went into the water at night, especially if the driver was trying to avoid the main road for some reason, it could have entered at a different location entirely. June 12, 2023, dawned clear and calm, perfect weather for a drone flight over Pinebridge Lake. Ethan Lowe arrived at the lake before sunrise, wanting to take advantage of the early morning light and minimal wind conditions. He'd been systematically searching bodies of water around Riverton for 3 months, working weekends and vacation days from his regular job. Pinebridge Lake was the 7th location on his list, chosen because it was large enough to hide a submerged vehicle but small enough to search thoroughly in a single day. Lowe's equipment included a high-resolution drone with a 4K camera, portable sonar equipment, and GPS mapping software that could create detailed charts of the lake bottom. He worked methodically, dividing the lake into grid sections and flying careful patterns to ensure complete coverage. The lake was larger than it appeared from the road, stretching back into several wooded coves that were invisible from the parking area. Previous searches had concentrated on the areas near the boat ramp and the main body of water, leaving the more remote sections largely unexplored. By mid-morning, Lowe had covered about 60% of the lake without finding anything unusual. The bottom was mostly sandy, with occasional logs and debris, typical of a small recreational lake in rural Georgia. It was 11:47 a.m. when his sonar detected an anomaly in the water near the eastern shore, in a cove hidden by overhanging trees. The object was large, roughly car-sized, and sitting in about 47 feet of water. At first, I thought it might be a boat, Lowe recalls. People sometimes abandon old boats in remote lakes, but as I got more detailed readings, the shape started to look more like a vehicle. Lowe immediately called the Richmond County Sheriff's Department, which had jurisdiction over the lake. Deputy Angela Martinez was dispatched to meet with him and assess the situation. Deputy Martinez arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by Detective Lisa Chen from the county's cold case unit. Detective Chen had taken over the Lilly and Marcus case files when they were transferred from the state level to county jurisdiction in 2020. Mr. Lowe showed us the sonar readings, and it definitely looked like it could be a vehicle, Detective Chen remembers. The size and shape were right, and it was in a location that made sense if someone had driven off the road at night. The sheriff's department had access to underwater cameras and professional diving equipment. Deputy Martinez contacted the dive team, while Detective Chen began making calls to notify other agencies about the potential discovery. The dive team arrived at 2:15 p.m., consisting of 3 experienced divers and a supervisor. The water in Pinebridge Lake was murky, with visibility limited to about 3 feet even with underwater lights. Diver Tommy Richardson was the first to reach the submerged object. His underwater camera confirmed what the sonar had suggested. It was definitely a vehicle, sitting upright on the lake bottom as if it had driven straight off the shore and into the water. The car was completely covered in algae and sediment, Richardson reported via radio. But I could make out the basic shape and size. It looked like a compact sedan, probably from the late 80s or early 90s. Richardson carefully approached the vehicle, looking for any identifying features. The license plate was unreadable, covered in 28 years of lake-bottom sediment, but he was able to make out part of the rear windshield and confirm that there were objects inside the car. The discovery that made everyone's heart race came when Richardson reached the driver's side door. Despite the algae and corrosion, he could clearly see fabric that looked like formal wear, the unmistakable shape of what appeared to be a dress in the passenger seat. That's when we knew, Detective Chen says. After 28 years, we'd found them. The recovery operation took several hours. The dive team attached lift bags to the vehicle and slowly brought it to the surface as crowds began gathering along the shore. Word had spread quickly through Riverton, and by evening hundreds of people had come to witness the end of their community's longest mystery. The car broke the surface at 6:23 p.m., water streaming from every opening as it was guided to shore. Despite the damage from nearly 3 decades underwater, it was clearly a red Honda Civic. and the license plate, once cleaned, matched the registration for Marcus Grant's vehicle. The Gwinnett County coroner, Dr. Patricia Williams, was on scene to oversee the recovery of human remains. 2 bodies were found inside the vehicle, still wearing what appeared to be formal attire. The remains were carefully removed and transported to the state crime lab for identification and autopsy. It was incredibly sad, but also a relief, remembers Dorothy Grant, who arrived at the lake shortly after the car was brought to shore. For 28 years we didn't know where our son was. Now we could finally bring him home. The forensic examination of the Honda Civic and the remains found inside provided the answers that 2 families had been seeking for nearly 3 decades. Dr. Patricia Williams and her team worked meticulously to determine the cause of death and reconstruct the events of that night in May 1995. The condition of the remains made identification challenging, but dental records confirmed what everyone already knew. The bodies were those of Lily Hart and Marcus Grant. They were found exactly as they would have been positioned during a normal drive, with Marcus in the driver's seat and Lily as his passenger. The autopsy results revealed no signs of foul play. There were no gunshot wounds, no evidence of blunt force trauma, and no indication that either teenager had been harmed by another person. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, with evidence of water in both victims' lungs. Perhaps most significantly, toxicology tests revealed the presence of carbon monoxide in both bodies, suggesting that the teenagers had lost consciousness before the car entered the water. This finding was crucial to understanding what had happened that night. The carbon monoxide levels were significant, Dr. Williams explained in her report. Not enough to be fatal on their own, but certainly enough to cause disorientation, confusion, and loss of consciousness. Combined with the late hour and the fact that they'd been awake for nearly 20 hours, it creates a clear picture of what likely occurred. The forensic examination of the vehicle itself provided additional clues. The Honda Civic showed no signs of mechanical failure that would have caused Marcus to lose control. The brakes were functional, the steering components were intact, and there was no evidence of tire failure. However, investigators did find evidence of a slow exhaust leak near the muffler connection. Over time, this type of leak could allow carbon monoxide to seep into the passenger compartment, especially when driving with the windows closed and the heater or air conditioning running. It was a perfect storm of circumstances, explains automotive forensics expert Dr. James Morrison, who examined the vehicle. A small exhaust leak, 2 tired teenagers, and a warm spring night with the windows probably closed. The carbon monoxide would have built up gradually, causing drowsiness and confusion before they realized what was happening. The location where the car was found also provided important information. The eastern cove of Pinebridge Lake was accessible by a narrow dirt road that branched off from Highway 41, about 2 miles north of Murphy's gas station, where the couple was last seen. This dirt road was barely visible from the highway, especially at night, and was used primarily by fishermen accessing remote areas of the lake. In 1995, there were no guardrails or barriers to prevent a vehicle from driving directly into the water. Crime scene investigators found evidence that the Honda Civic had approached the water at a relatively slow speed, suggesting that Marcus had not been driving recklessly or fleeing from something. The tire tracks, though faded after 28 years, indicated a straight path from the dirt road into the lake. It appears that Mr. Grant may have been looking for a place to pull over, perhaps because he was feeling unwell or disoriented, Detective Chen theorized. The dirt road would have seemed like a safe place to stop, but in his compromised state, he may not have realized how close to the water he was driving. The theory that emerged from the forensic evidence painted a tragic picture of an accident that could have been prevented. Marcus and Lily, affected by carbon monoxide poisoning from the exhaust leak, had pulled off the highway looking for a place to rest or get fresh air. In their confused state, Marcus had driven too far down the dirt road and straight into the lake. The car would have sunk quickly in the deep water, giving the unconscious teenagers no chance to escape. The location was so remote and the water so deep that the vehicle remained undiscovered despite extensive search efforts in 1995. It's heartbreaking because it was so preventable, Dr. Williams noted.